Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium Podcast and our first episode on Caine Black Knife. This is book 3 in the whatever it's called series, Caine something or other.
The Axe of Caine.
The Axe of Caine, that's the one. I am your host, Craig, and you've heard him already, but over there, that is Drew. How's it going, Drew?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I mean, what am I going to do? Not have you back? Although I should have put in a Drew needs to trim his beard rider in the contract.
I really do. It's getting out of control.
You're like a mountain man right now.
Yeah.
And that's not for anybody else because most of you are listening. Some of you will be watching on YouTube, but it's just for my own comfort. You know, it's I can't handle Drew in this state. So.
It'll be trimmed by the time you get here this weekend.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think maybe we'll end up recording part 2 while I'm out there in Colorado. All right, Drew, Caine's Law, book 3, Caine Black Knife. I skipped the housekeeping. Should I do housekeeping? You know what? I'll do housekeeping at the end. Okay. Let's just talk about the freaking book, and then if anybody cares about the housekeeping, they can keep listening at the end. All right, Drew, I have my first question that is chambered and ready to fire for you. And it's been on my mind since about halfway through this reading. Okay, so we ended on at the end of part 1, which is convenient. There are 2 parts to this book. We read part 1. I love it when that lines up like that. Okay. About halfway through part 1, I had this phrase keep going through my head. You're not the only one who uses it. There are also some people on Discord who have said things of this nature, but you keep using the word fun when you talk about Caine Black Knife. Now, there are portions of it that, like, there are funny moments. He has some great one-liners, some zingers that I appreciate. But I'm curious if you're referring to that sort of thing, or if you're like, oh no, this story is fun. And I'm like, I don't know if I would put it that way. So defend yourself, Drew. Why is this a fun book?
So part of it for sure is there's a lot more humor in this one. There's just straight up more action. And a lot of the action doesn't have the same like sense of doom tied to it as in Blade of Tyshalle, where half of this book is retreat from the Bodecan, which is something we know has already happened. We know it launched Caine's career. Like, there isn't the same kind of dread when you're reading through it, because you know he's going to survive and he's going to go on to have this huge mega career. So in that sense, like, when I think of fun in this book, I think of Caine having his one-on-one against the Black Knife outside the gates of hell. And he, you know, like, he just like smacks down this Black Knife and like totally embarrasses him. And you're like, oh, wow. You go, and the whole thing, of course, is in his head and he's cracking wise all over the place. And like, and there's a lot more of that kind of stuff, which was basically absent for Blade of Tyshalle.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. So simple as that then.
Yeah.
So for those who are following along without having read the book, Caine Black Knife refers to the Black Knife clan of Ogrillo, the ogres basically of this overworld. And in book 2, in Blade of Tyshalle, he befriends a Black Knife Ogrillo in prison, and he gets adopted into the Black Knife clan. What we didn't know is what Caine had done to the Black Knife clan a generation earlier, right? And so this is the story that we're getting is, as you said, retreat from the Bodecan, which is like an area, basically an area on the map that that the Ogrillo are presumably going to end up chasing him out of somehow. He's going to have to retreat from the Bodecan, or maybe they will. I don't know how it's going to go, but it's a giant battle. Basically him and a half dozen others, some actors, some not. And it's them against a giant mass of snarling, tusked ogre warriors. So that's about where we're at. At the end of part 1, he and a couple of the women in his crew have been captured. there's some really messed up Ogrillo religious ceremony stuff going on. It's all gross.
Caine is nailed to a cross.
Exactly. Caine is nailed to, I think he calls it a Y-shaped cross. Anyway, so that's just to give people a little bit of footing. It's kind of a last stand situation. So anyway, what I thought of, and we'll come back to the whole fun idea, I'm sure, as we go. But I wanted to run this by you, Drew, and then I'll turn you loose on the book. Have you ever played Doom?
A very tiny bit.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of it. I've only played a little bit.
Okay. So are you talking, when you say you've seen a lot of it, are you talking about the 90s classic Doom and Doom 2, or you're talking about the new Fingal stuff?
Okay. I've seen like the OG, 2D, 2D sprites shooter,
perfect,
all the way up to the most recent, like crazy, like 3D platformer, Doom Eternal, I think it was. Yeah.
Doom Eternal. Well, we'll get there in just a sec. So for those who remember, there's a reason I'm bringing this up. In the 90s, Doom, this classic shooter game, very gory, and it's addictive and it's fun. It was revolutionary at the time, and people had a lot of fun with it. And the joke behind it was, just how superhuman this guy was. You're just mowing down armies of demons and these massive things. You're just some guy with a gun, right? But you're mowing all these things down and having a great time doing it. And that was it. Like, that was basically the storyline of the game is you've gone to hell and you need to defeat a bunch of demons to et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't matter. So when the remake comes out, 2016, I think it was, Bethesda puts out a new Doom game. And again, it's just called Doom, but they lean into that and they make a kind of tongue-in-cheek, somewhat jokey mythology around your memory of the 90s Doom game, where now there's this cult that has built up among demons around the Doom Slayer, and just this figure that strikes terror into the heart of demons because he cannot be killed, he cannot be stopped, and if you see him, you are going to die, that sort of thing. And Doom Eternal takes it another step, where now people on Earth literally view him as a religious figure. It's all it's hilarious and really fun at the same time. And his entire character is summed up in the catchphrase, the tagline of the game, which is "rip and tear." Like, that's what he does. He just kills demons.
Yep.
So anybody who's played the game, they're following along. Hopefully I explained it well to people who haven't played it, because that's how I feel reading this, where I wasn't sure what you were talking about when you said, it's book 3 is all about the retreat from the Bodecan. I was like, well, how's that going to work? Is it a prequel or whatever? But it's kind of this clever way of transmitting to us the mythology of Caine, the origin story of capital C Caine, the Caine that we've come to know, right? And it reminded me very much of, he's not a hero, he's just a force of nature, a force of will who mows down anything in his path, much like the Doomslayer. So there you go. There's my tie-in from other pop culture venues. What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on, and that's why, that's playing Doom, like this, like horribly graphic, gory, just violence riddled video game, is exactly the same kind of fun as Caine Black Knife. Now, I should say that's exactly the same kind of fun as Retreat from the Bodecan, but there are 2 different things going on here. We're 3 books into the series now, and all 3 books have presented us with a different narrative structure.
Right. Oh my gosh, yeah.
This one is a split. It's, we have Retreat from the Bodecan, and then
And so it's separated into then and now. So you have then, which is the retelling, or you're kind of rewatching it, right, through one of these mind cube things. And then that was then, and the now portions deal with the actual aftermath of Blade of Tyshalle.
Yes. And interestingly, not only do we have this split timeline, both timelines are in first person this time. In Heroes Die, we had a split between Overworld and Earth, and those were split in first for most of Overworld, and third for Earth and when Caine is offline on Overworld.
Right.
In Blade of Tyshalle, we get, again, a split first and third, but we have, things like Delian and Kirindal and Toa Saitel. Like, we have lots more points of view. Here, it's all Caine, and it's all first person. But there's a wrinkle.
Oh, man. Okay.
Each then chapter starts with Retreat from the Bodecan, partial, You Are Caine. Featured actor, professional Hari Michelson, master, not for distribution under penalty of law. Copyright 2187, Adventures Unlimited, Incorporated, all rights reserved. This is an indicator that this is somebody in the present timeline watching a cube of Retreat from the Bodecan.
Right.
So there is a somebody, we don't know who yet, is, for one reason or another, reviewing Caine's most famous adventure.
There's a part of me that wants it to be Caine.
Oh, interesting. So, I mean,
go on.
There is certainly a theme, like when we get into the now stuff, because the now is Caine going back to the Bodecan, back to Perthan's Ford,
right,
and kind of grappling with his memories and the guilt and the fallout of his actions and the consequences. But I was just going to add like one more little thing that I find a lot of fun.
Okay.
The very first page after the title page, Caine Black Knife, is this. For those who are watching.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
For those who are not, it is a rating like a
video game rating.
Yeah. And the adventure depicted in this recording has received a rating of UV/X from the Studio Ratings Advisory Board for full sensory experiences of torture, sexual perversion, extreme graphic violence, and adult language. I love that adult language tossed in after all of this.
How amazing is it when you see something for like a hard R movie and it's kind of like that. It's graphic violence, extreme sexual scenarios, and smoking. And you're like, at a certain point, I think where the smoking doesn't really register anymore. It's like between me and Jeff Bezos, we are billionaires, right? I'm the smoking in this situation.
Yeah. But it gets even better because then you read the fine print on this. The viewer's access of the images and sensations contained in this recording constitutes a legal agreement in which the viewer fully indemnifies and holds harmless Adventures Unlimited Incorporated and all subsidiaries for any and all damages actually or potentially resultant to said access, including but not limited to emotional trauma, physical injury, and mental disability, permanent or temporary.
Which is, it's a great, I mean, it is funny, but it's also a great way to tell the reader. And honestly, like at this point, if you're on book 3, you should know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
But I would say there have been worse images, especially in Blade of Tyshalle, like worse moments, visuals and whatnot. But we haven't had, to my recollection, you tell me if I'm wrong, but as far as battles go, like hand-to-hand combat violence, the only thing I can think of that comes close to what we've seen in Caine Black Knife was the fate of, what's her name, the swordsman Talon in book 1. Yeah. That might be not that there hasn't been other
the escape
episodes
from
of
the
violence,
dungeon, possibly in the first book too.
Yeah.
Also with Talon.
So anyway,
yes.
but I guess my point being, in Blade of Tyshalle, it was more like whatever the phrase was emotional damage. This is more like physical, in your face, guts flying around kind of violence, pissing on corpses and all sorts of just horrific stuff going on.
Right.
In battle.
Yeah. And like this kind of goes back to my point of like the fun thing. Blade of Tyshalle and Caine Black Knife both depict scenes of really awful violence.
Yes.
Including sexual violence sometimes.
Yes.
But I can't quite put my finger on why. Those scenes don't feel like they have the same like level of perversion that they did in Blade of Tyshalle. Like here, you're talking about, we don't have to go into details, but the Black Knife ritual. Like
it's
when you stop and think about that, you're like, huh.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel anywhere near as bad as, for instance, Kolberg and Tainelkoth in what used to be the hospital in Blade of Tyshalle.
Yeah, I think there are reasons why it feels different. And Blade of Tyshalle just leaned so heavily into Caine's emotions. How is he feeling about what's going on? And that guides you to how you're feeling about what's going on. And because of his love for his wife, because of his maybe regret for some of the choices he's made through his life, and him trying to come to terms with that, it heightens when you come across a scene, like when his wife is killed halfway through Blade of Tyshalle. It's not just violent, it's emotional damage. Whereas in this one, Caine, we're flashing back to a Caine who has not yet come to regret his career path and his decisions. He's somebody who is trying actively to use sex and violence and whatnot to increase his standing.
He wants to go maximum bad. He
wants maximum bad. And because of that, it's I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's a bit like one of the worst things about Breaking Bad, the all-time greatest television show, is that it tricks you into cheering for a depraved drug dealer who's doing and saying awful things to anybody who has ever loved him, or come across him. It's a little bit similar that way, where you come across these horrific acts of violence, or the ritual, the Ogrilla ritual, and you're in his head going, yeah, that's what's happening, but what I care about is how I'm going to get out of it, how I'm going to use this to further my career. You're not wallowing with him the way that you did in book 2. Right.
But then you get to him in the current timeline, and he very much does wallow, but it's from more of a remove.
Yeah.
He's not immediately seeing these depredations. He's seeing the effects of slavery and, the mutilation of Ogreloi, where in order to be eligible for jobs,
for work
they have
permits,
to remove their fighting claws.
And genitals.
Well, they can be half eligible.
They have to castrate themselves if they want the good jobs. And if you don't do it, then you're only eligible for, like dock workers and miners and stuff like that. That was a really interesting passage. I don't think there's a lot to dwell on yet, but the idea that that it's this really sinister way to breed out traits that you don't want in a certain population by only
the smart ones want the good jobs.
Exactly.
So you get rid of their ability to breed.
Exactly. The smart ones now can't have kids. And so, eventually, it's gross. It's gross. And really calls to mind speaking of sinister, some really sinister stuff from, say, the early part of the 20th century, and ideas around eugenics and all of that. Because eugenics was not just about improving the human race. It was about usually it was about improving one part of the human race, literally and explicitly, to the detriment of others. Really gross.
Yeah, and the framing that he puts it in here, under the very watchful eye of the Knights of Krill, who, in a traditional fantasy sense, these are the upright heroes, paladins, the honorable warriors who have healing powers and fight for the sun god, and and all of that. And the more you get to see them, the more you get to know them, you're like, wow, these guys suck. Like it's he really plays with expectation and subverts traditional fantasy tropes here while playing into them. Like if this is a D&D campaign, these guys are like vengeance paladins, basically.
Right.
And typically, those are the guys who are like good alignment. And halfway through the book here, there's a real question of whether you can say these guys are good. Like, they certainly view themselves as that. They, in one sense, for like the geopolitics of Overworld, where there's a real threat of extinction for humanity in a world where all these other fantasy races are ascendant over humanity, the Knights of Krill are like a bastion of human hope. But how do we, how are we maintaining that hope here?
I don't know that it's possible that it's because I'm reading them in the context that I am, with Caine and his point of view. But I never quite bought into that Knights of Krill mythology, because they introduced pretty early on the idea that Krill, this god Krill, who can heal you and give you the strength of 10 men and all this stuff, will withdraw his love, so to speak, which I just made sound dirtier than I meant. But anyway, he will withdraw his love from you if you fill in the blank. And basically it's like, if you're not a martial, violence oriented, I don't know, like a Knight of Krill just seems like they give themselves to violence, much like the Ogreloi do in the book, right? It's just they pretend to have higher ideals, and it's like, if you don't play the game, if you're not going to die fighting, then Krill will withdraw from you. That's the impression I got. Is that not right?
Okay. I don't think you're necessarily right, but I don't think you're necessarily wrong either. I would not equate them to the Ogreloi in terms of violence. The Knights of Krill are much more ritualized. There's a lot more of the I only have the countenance of Krill upon me if I am engaged in honorable combat. And the reason Turkhild gets wrecked by Caine in the little prison cell is because he wasn't engaging in honorable combat, and Krill withdrew his love and allowed Caine to win.
I see. Okay.
So there is like a real religious power going on here, but that's also not to say that you can't work within the bounds of their rules and be a dick,
right,
and do awful things.
Which
yeah, they very much do. but then, so we've already talked a little bit about Turkhild here, and of course you've seen Markham, who one of my favorite lines in the entire book. It is just absolutely beautiful. Let me pull this up.
Remind me who Markham is.
He was the guy who greeted Caine when he woke up from being healed after being beat up in the prison.
Right. Okay. And they have a long philosophical discussion together.
They do. And he leads him up to the top of the spire.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He gets to go meet their prophet, basically.
Anvas.
And
we'll
the guy,
talk about her in a moment.
And the guy, he realizes halfway there that the reason this guy is so pissed off at him is because he wants to go meet the prophet, and he's not allowed to. And this heathen Caine gets to.
So the first time Markham is introduced, Caine like wakes up and he rolls over and he looks. Seated in a severe chair by a severe window was a severe man in severe armor. I love that character introduction. That is so perfect for Markham. Like, he is
severe.
He is exactly that. and he's also like, he's kind of a dick. And but then we get to the Purific Apex, and we meet Angvas. And she is not what Caine expected. She certainly wasn't what I expected.
Yeah.
After meeting the first two Knights of Krill. What are your impressions of her?
Worldly and jaded, tired. And we find out later in part 1 that it's abnormal that she's been... What's the title? What's her title?
The Champion of Krill.
The Champion of Krill. Yeah, that it's apparently unusual that she's been the Champion of Krill for 3 years.
Yeah, they don't have a long life expectancy.
Right. And so when we meet her, it felt a bit like, you ever watch a documentary about like a cult, and it comes to light that the cult leader is just super cynical, doesn't believe a single word they're saying, but they like having the acolytes and, the money and the fame pour in.
Sure.
That's what she sounded a bit like, kind of rolling her eyes at her own religion a little bit. Yeah. So anyway, that was my impression.
Interesting.
Is that not correct? But that is complicated by... I'm not saying she doesn't believe a word that she's saying. It's complicated because on Overworld, when you talk about a god like Krill or Tyshalle or what's the river goddess, these are real entities that grant real powers that can be seen and felt. And it's not the way... So religion and gods don't work the same way on Overworld that they do here. Where there's a very real consequence and benefit to believing in Krill and following Krill, right? So it is complicated by that. So I'm not saying that she doesn't believe a word that she's saying. She's just very cynical about the way she talks about it and uses it.
Yeah, that's fair. Because she for sure is a believer.
Right. I mean, how could she not be? She gets the power.
Yeah. But
why do you ask?
Well, we're going to be seeing more of her. She is one of my favorite characters in the series outside of Caine. She's fascinating. And I think this first encounter with her is quite fascinating for exactly that that reason. She gets built up through several chapters through the filter of other Knights of Krill, and there's all this pomp and circumstance, and he has to do like the symbolic cleansing by swimming through like a pool of blood before he can go up to see her, and he has to wear like a ritual cloak to do it, and then even just the symbolism of where he meets her on the top of a spire created with magic by Milekoth,
right,
plated in platinum with this like mythological sword in the stone planted in the top of it, and it's this just unreal religious experience, but their conversation is so direct. And though you don't know what the actual history is between Perthen Claylock and Caine, you know it is not amicable. And she's the niece.
Right.
And she does look up to him. I love I think when he first meets her and she introduces herself as Angvas Claylock and he goes, "Any relation?" And she says, "That great man has the honor of being my uncle." The first thing is "that great man." And you're like, oh boy. But she also kind of, there's like a kindred spirit thing going on there where she recognizes the world weariness and the regret in Caine, Dominic Shade, I think it's worth pointing out, Dominic Shade is the name he's using here. She recognizes that in him, and she feels at least some of that as well. She recognizes that some of the things the Knights of Krill are doing to maintain power here are not great. You know, they're playing two sides against each other. Like, there's the whole deal with Freedom's Face and these like Onconan insurgents in Perthan's Ford that they know about and in fact are like manipulating in turn. And that's what Turkild's job is. And like, so she knows that while she is the living symbol of their honor, there isn't necessarily that honor in reality to the core of the Knights of Krill. And I think that's eating at her.
Okay. So, but you're saying she's going to show up a lot in the second half then?
Yeah. This is not the last time Caine and Ongvas are going to cross paths.
Right. Okay. Anything else you want to say about her? Because I want to talk about her opponent a little bit.
I don't have anything more to say about her. I'll save something regarding this scene for later in the episode.
Okay. All right.
You're saying her opponent. Are you talking about Orbeck?
You betcha.
Yeah.
We should talk about Orbeck.
Oh boy.
Because
what a scene.
Orbeck. Yes, the scene when we finally get to Orbeck is unexpected. So, to catch people up, the reason Caine is here in the first place is because he heard that his adopted brother Orbeck was in trouble. He gets to, what's the name of the town?
Perthan's Ford.
Perthan's Ford. He gets to Perthan's Ford. He knows that Orbeck is in trouble. Introduces himself as Orbeck's brother, and everybody's raising their eyebrows at that, right? Because Orbeck is an ogre, an ogrillo. And so, yeah, he's my brother. What about it? And so nobody will quite tell him what's going on, and he's trying to piece it all together. He finally finds the ogre, Orbeck. Gosh, why is that name not sticky enough? Orbeck should be easy to remember. Anyway, he finds Orbeck with his surprise wife. And it's this whole... Drew, explain what is going on in this scene, because Orbeck is having relations with his wife. Caine interrupts it. It's all very ogre style. It's really something. But then we find out that Orbeck may have adopted Caine as a Black Knife, and they may be brothers. That does not mean that they are happy to see each other, that they like each other, that this is a merry reunion. So what is going on in this scene? Oh, and I should say he's in prison because he tried to start an uprising against the Krillians, and
because he very specifically emptied a clip from an automatic
pistol, like an Uzi
gun, into Ogvas Claylock. But because she's the champion of Krill, she lived. Mistakes were made. So I'm trying to decide what I think I'm allowed to say here. In this scene, Caine confronts Orbeck over his foolishness and is like, look, go bow the knee, or she is going to murder you 8 ways from Sunday in your duel. And you're my brother, and I don't want you dead. And Orbeck's like, look, me dying is the point here. Me dying on my feet is proving that the Black Knives are not broken. We will not bow. We will not give submission to the Knights of Krill. And me dying like this will free them. And Caine's like, look, dude, you never really cared about the Black Knives before this. What's going on? Who's this Ogrillo woman? Not going to use the word that Caine uses.
Well, it's apparently it's very consistent. Sorry, I want to stop right there because
consistent.
That is the word. They speak of themselves in dog terms, shall we say? Pups.
They do.
And anyway, all right.
Yeah,
go on.
He's like, you didn't care about any of this. Who is she, and how did she get you to care about it? And the more he talks, the more puzzle pieces start getting put together. And he realizes, and he says, look, you're getting played. You're not the one in charge here. She is. And she doesn't have your best interests at heart. That's what I'm going to say about that.
And I think it's a pretty powerful scene because Orbeck basically says, I don't care. I don't believe you. This is my wife. How dare you? Pregnant wife. How dare you come in here with no prior knowledge of the situation and, within minutes assume that that you have my best interests at heart, that you understand what's going on and that she doesn't. If you step back and consider Caine not as the hero of the story, but as a character in the story,
yeah,
you're like, dude, I'm with you, Orbeck. Who's this guy? Just because he's the protagonist in the story doesn't mean that he is omniscient and all understanding.
I'm so glad you brought up that perspective. I want to talk about this scene from the perspective of Caineism.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Now we're talking. Now let me plug our Patreon feeds. Okay, yes. We'll do a little housekeeping here and say that we recorded 2 episodes. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the last release, but we recorded, I guess, 3 episodes on what's it called?
Blade of Tyshalle.
Blade of Tyshalle.
We actually did 4 because we also did Chapter 0.
We did Chapter 0. And that's right. So the discussion on Chapter 0 and the discussion on Chapter 14, I think it was, are both Patreon exclusives. And so if you're a patron at all, at any level, you get access to those. So you should go check those out. So what we dived, I don't know about dived deep, but we did an hour-long good swim in concepts of Caineism and what that all means. So go check that out. All right, go on.
So we're 3 books into this series, and there have been 3 central conflicts set up for each book. In book 1, Caine wants to save his wife. In book 2, Caine wants to save his daughter. In book 3, Caine wants to save his brother.
Right.
There's a theme going on here. Now, in book 1, did Caine's wife really want him to save her?
No, she thought she had it handled.
In book 2, Caine's daughter very much did. That was one of the things she always held on to throughout it. She would remark, and it would piss Avery Shanks off. Daddy's going to come for me. Daddy, right. Do you know what Daddy's going to do to you for this? But here, again, does Caine's brother want to be saved? Mm-mm. And we have an added wrinkle. What is Orbeck's driving motivation here? His wife. His children.
Yeah. Dang it. Oh, this is good. This is good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we're looking at Caine's attitude and Cainist philosophy as an overarching thing, of course Caine is pissed off at Orbeck for this because Orbeck is acting like a Cainist. But in typical Caine fashion, it's hypocritical. Because this is exactly what he would do.
That's my favorite thing about Caineism, is that Caine hates it.
Yeah.
He lives by it almost perfectly, but he hates it.
Yeah.
We're all bundles of contradiction, right? And Caine is no different. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've given me something to consider, to chew on with Orbeck's motivations. Do we get anything else from that chapter on that, or am I going to have to wait to keep reading about that?
I don't think we got anything else from that chapter. Orbeck basically told him, like, all right, that's enough. Go jump in a pond.
Which is like, it's what, a day or 2 from when Orbeck is supposed to duel with the champion? The night before. That's right. So there's really no time going on here. Yeah. Okay, so we'll keep our eye on that going forward. The motivations, family motivations. Ooh, it's like a Fast and Furious movie, right? It's really just all about family. Okay.
All right, Dom.
Yeah, you're darn right. You're damn right. Sorry. Was I going? Oh,
well, okay.
Go on. Nope, go on. I was going to radically change gears. So if you have something else on that subject,
like, I want to talk about the parallel storylines we have going on here in light of this. I think for most people, it's likely that when you're reading through Caine Black Knife for the first time, Retreat from the Bodecan is like the driving force. It's like, oh, I want to get back to that. I want to see what happens next, you know? And then, because it's just chock full of action.
Right.
And then the Perthens Ford stuff is much more contemplative. It's slower. It's a lot of like walking around and having conversations.
It's also more mysterious. You don't like, it's harder to piece together what's going on and who's talking about what now. What do you Knights of Krill and Krill does what? Yeah. You know, just there's more confusion in the now.
Because a lot of the necessary context for it is stuff we haven't gotten to yet in Retreat from the Bodecan.
Right. Right.
We're told, like, the first chapter, he's on a riverboat going into Perthens Ford, and he finds out they call that river the Caine Way. And you're like, what? You know, and you know he's got this history with Perth and Claylock, the guy who's the namesake for the town. And you know that it's not a good history somehow. So there was some
mistakes were made, as you said.
Dislike, yeah. And so a lot of what's going on there, you're just like kind of wandering. But I think because of that, like it really depends on what kind of reader you are and what about these books is most attractive. If you're reading these as like popcorn, yeah, the Retreat from the Bodecan stuff literally made to be entertainment.
Yeah.
As well as to be a commentary on violent entertainment. But versus, like, I find, certainly on my 5th or 6th reread, the Perthens Ford stuff to be way more fascinating. Because there are still wrinkles that I'm uncovering here.
This actually ties into what I was about to start talking about. And that is the commentary on violent entertainment. And there's something structurally that goes on in the recording, the then portions, the Retreat from the Bodecan, that points to that kind of a commentary. And it's in, where's my copy of the book? I think I set it on the table over there. It's tracking or scanning or what is it when you jump in the recording? Scanning forward. Right? So one of the reasons that this book is shorter than the others is this brilliant, I think it's a brilliant thing he does. I can't read it. What does it say?
Scanning forward? It says scanning forward. It's
scanning forward. Okay. All right. Yeah. I'll get there in a sec. One of the reasons this book is shorter and that it moves so quickly is because in the recording version, as you say, somebody is watching this recording of the Retreat from the Bodecan, and it'll give that thing that you mentioned, the title at the front, "You Are Caine," and this is the recording of the Retreat from the Bodecan. Copyright this, whatever. And you'll go through a scene, and Caine will give a rousing speech, and then they'll all kind of get set for this Ogrillo attack, scanning forward. You're in the middle of the Ogrillo attack, and stuff is burning. There's explosions. Heads are getting chopped off. And then finally, you know, the final scene that I can remember in that portion is when, I guess before he's captured, is when he and, what's her name? It starts with an M.
Mairead.
Okay, Mairead.
Or Mairead. I think the audio says
in Mairead. The audiobook he says Mairead. Yeah, it doesn't matter either way. The two of them are she's healing him through the power of Krill.
And what a scene.
He doesn't really care about any of that because he's so blank and horny that he can't concentrate on how broken his body is because he just wants to have sex with this woman. And and manages to make that happen. And there's this, I'm going to go ahead and call it an intentionally awkward sex scene. It's
definitely.
Yeah. It's awkward. And you get to kind of like the climax and, deep breaths are taken, scanning forward. And then, okay, let's go on with our adventure, right? Okay, now we can leave the room. And it skips the boring stuff. And it makes the book move. It also provides a little bit of mystery. You know, you're wondering what happened in between those scenes. Why are we scanning forward? Wasn't that important? But it's at the same time a commentary on violent and sexualized entertainment. Salacious entertainment. That's a great word for it. Where I'm trying to be diplomatic here with my language, but some people just skip to the good stuff, right? The quote unquote good stuff. And there's some commentary to be made there about how he structures the flashback versus, as you say, the Perthens Ford present moment stuff where there's the promise of violence. There is going to be this duel between Orbeck and what's her name?
Angvas.
Angvas, thank you. There will be this stuff happening. In the meantime, there's a lot to sort through emotionally and philosophically, and psychologically. You have to stop and sit with this stuff and consider this stuff in that portion of the book. Whereas in Retreat from the Bodecan, it's like, let's get to the good stuff. Let's mutilate some corpses.
In the immortal words of Todd, let's get to the punchin'.
It's a Ken, but yeah.
Oh, that's Ken. Yeah, Ken. That's right. Yeah.
Let's get to the punchin'. Yeah, exactly. It's so the first time I came across scanning forward, my first instinct was, whoa, wait a minute. We were just getting to the good stuff. But I think I've read enough and consumed enough violent entertainment that I'm like, no, the good stuff is what happens in between. But I definitely remember, hey, I was a teenager. I was a young person at one point who loved the sex and violence, the rock and roll of my stories. So I get it. But I think at this point in my life, I'm more of a Perthens Ford kind of guy than a Bodecan kind of guy.
Yeah, totally. And like you said, it's 100% intentional on the part of Stover that he's doing deliberate things. And when you mentioned it adds a bit of mystery of like, what happened in the intervening time, I would say it adds yet another layer of mystery in what are the motivations and desires of whomever is clicking fast forward here.
Yeah.
And why is this person watching and cutting where they are?
Oh, is it? Well, no, there are more than just hints that she dies. The Maraid, the love interest. There's I want to say right at the end of section 1, there's some indication that like she died, but maybe he just thinks she died. Anyway, I guess what I'm getting to is, could it be her? Is she rewatching this?
No, I'm pretty sure it happened in this part of the book. We are told she survived Retreat from the Bodecan, but she was tortured to death by Bairn.
Oh, ooh, yikes. That is, pick your poison. An Ogrillo torture or a Bairn torture. I think I might take the Ogrillos.
Yeah.
That guy was messed up.
But, so I will tell you, the first time I read this book, I think I mentioned it on our Blade episode, the part 2 episode, I totally missed that Avery Shanks killed Kolberg.
Oh, yeah.
The first time I read Blade of Tyshalle. And so reading through this, I just assumed it was Kolberg watching.
Oh.
That's and awesome. I was very wrong.
Oh, he did.
Yeah. He eaten.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. What a scene.
It turned out Avery Shanks quite liked the taste of blood.
Oh, my gosh. All right, Drew, are you ready for me to blow your mind?
Ooh, heck yeah.
we've been talking for 50 minutes already. So that means it's probably about time to start into final thoughts. Anything you're looking... Well, you've read these books enough times that really what I should be asking for is, what are you excited for me to read? Like, what, without giving anything away, is there anything you can tell me about, here's what you should look for, here's what you should be excited for in part 2, kind of looking forward? I will say, for my part, as you consider that, what I'm excited for is I haven't seen any retreats happen yet. This is all about the retreat from the Bodecan, which is this region, right? They're in the castle, the what do they call it? The vertical castle or something like that?
The vertical city, yeah.
Vertical city. They're in the vertical city, which kind of reminds me of like Minas Tirith or something, with all these different layers and levels that go up. And nobody's retreating yet. They're all just dying, right? Or getting captured at the end of this part. And so so is Caine going to end up retreating, or is he going to inflict so much devastation on the Black Knives that they end up retreating from the Bodecan and he's chasing them out? What does that title mean? I could see myself being frustrated by not knowing halfway through the book what that title even means. But in this case, I kind of feel like, oh, it's building. Oh, we're getting somewhere here. And it's going to be interesting to see what retreat means.
I'll make an explicit promise that we'll talk about that title within the second half of the book.
All right. Fair enough. And it's also, I have to consider that title came from Adventures Unlimited. This is a marketing title.
Correct.
This is not... Caine did not name this. It was the company that named it. And so what are they going to try to sell to their audience?
Yes. Now, there is one thing I really, really need to talk about.
Okay.
And we're going to go back to this scene on the Pier of Apex with Angvas and Caine.
That's right. Okay, you did have something else you wanted to say.
He makes this deal with her. He says, if I'm going to help you out, you need to give me authority. I don't want to get pushed around by these...
Knights of Krill.
Yeah. He uses a different word, but...
Sure.
In typical Caine fashion. But she finally acquiesces. And in doing so, she reached to lay her hand lightly on that angled handle, fingers curling gently around it in what was almost a caress. The universe snapped into focus. And from here, the rest of the scene is this, like, crazy, disjointed mess of the soft prickle of blood-rusted wall against skin drying tight and stretched. The damp, glazed chill of the platinum under feet colder than the breeze that smelled of coal smoke and rain. Eyes shrouded with limp, wet hair the same bleak brown as the robes. And these are physical sensations from her perspective coming to Caine, and he's freaking out. And he says, I'll censor this since this is a Legendarium thing. What the F did you just do? Because these were the words I always said now. These were the words I'd been planning to say at this moment since the birth of the universe. And by the time she spoke, I already knew, and she talks. And it happened. The flash of gray steel and the jewel spray of blood and firelight blossomed inside my head, blazing the silent anguish of a wounded god, as it was going to happen 500 years ago. Again. And again from my mouth came the words I always said now. And we have this crazy conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I have always been here because there is no past. All that exists of the past is the web of flow whose black knots are the structure of the present. I will always be here because there is no future. Everything that is about to happen never will. Now is all there is. I have always sat in the rubble of the financial block, facing down the length of God's way over the carnage and ruin of Old Town, perched on a blast-folded curve of a silk-car hull with Cassal's cold steel across my lap. And it goes through. I face the God in the infinite now. I say again, forever. It's an echo of my past, or something. Let the thing go, will you? She released it, and time leaked back into the universe. Remember that.
It's hard to forget. It was, I remember being intensely interested by that scene. And I shouldn't say it's hard to forget, because it's not. It's because he goes on with the story and you forget about that.
This is 28% of the way into the book.
Right. And anyway, so, yeah, oh boy. He's meddling with forces beyond our comprehension at this point. Yeah, okay, so...
Or she is meddling with forces.
I meant Matthew Stover.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. Okay. I will remember
just
that.
Double check my highlighted things here to make sure
that you didn't miss something. While you do that, let me say this, Drew, because you were kind enough to censor yourself on a Legendarium episode, something that I occasionally fail to do, but that's neither here nor there. I want to mention this. Matthew Stover makes his own way in terms of profanity in this book. Okay.
Yeah.
So the swearing in this book is, it's really something. It has to be seen to be believed, right? However, I want to posit something, that this is one of those the student became the master situations. Remember a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we had Scott Lynch on to talk about Heroes Die?
Sure.
And you were there. Anyway, I hadn't thought much about it until this book in particular. First of all, there is a great moment where Caine uses the phrase "F me like a goat," and you're like, wait a minute, that's Baron's phrase. He stole that from literally the worst character in the entire series, with the possible exception of Kolberg, who isn't real at that point. But anyway, so there's some real swearing going on. I would say that Scott Lynch read this book, as we know he did, and took a lot of inspiration from it. I think Scott Lynch took Matthew Stover's penchant for cursing and elevated it to an art form in Lies of Locke Lamora. That I am. This takes nothing away from Matthew Stover, who is a lot of fun to read. If you enjoy colorful profanity, then this is really something, right? He does a great job. I'm not taking anything away from him to say that I see where Scott Lynch read this and went, oh, I'll take it from here, and elevated it further.
Look, there is no doubt in my mind the single funniest line ever put to pen in a fantasy book starts with "nice bird."
Yeah, okay. And ends, well, we'll leave it there.
Yeah. But I will say another one of my contenders is in this book. It is on like page 2.
Okay.
Caine is using his like, he calls it a monocular. And he says, right, that's them. He's watching the dust cloud, or and Tizar says, "You're sure? How can you be sure?" And he says, "I could quote Sun Tzu at her. Dust high and sharp will be chariots. Dust low and wide is infantry." But instead I shrug and hand her the monocular. If Sun Tzu had ever seen infantry like this, he would have crapped his silk effing pajamas.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I'm like, that's page 2. In fact, that's page 1 of the book.
Is it really?
He starts off with that.
That's awesome.
You know what kind of book you're getting when he starts off with that.
It's the "and smoking," right? And adult language.
Yeah. That's adult language.
Let's start with a little light adult language, and then we'll get into the other stuff later. That is pretty good.
So good.
All right, Drew. So a little housekeeping and then a little bit of, final draft style stuff. Just reminder to everybody that this is a shared experience between the Legendarium and Inking Out Loud. So the next episode in which we discuss the second half of Caine Black Knife will be on Inking Out Loud. Make sure you're subscribed. Go check it out. We will be there in, a couple weeks, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And then we'll flip for what's it called?
Caine's Law.
Caine's Law. Caine's Law. The first episode will be on Inking Out Loud, and then the finale will be here on the Legendarium. All of these episodes are available on both Patreon feeds, so go check those out. If you're a patron of either show, then you get both episodes in one place, or both sets of episodes in one place.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what was the last thing I was going to... Oh, that's right. Final draft stuff. This isn't Inking Out Loud, but still, Drew, we didn't record this in the morning, so we have beers. And I had one based on... I was telling you before we started... I wanted to bring one on just based on the final chapter, which is where we see the ritual, the Black Knife ritual of, I believe the phrase is manual insemination going on with the Ogreloi. It's all very disturbing. And Caine, so they have their religious ceremony going on. It's gross. And then Caine swears an oath. And who does he swear the oath to? Do we know?
You do not know. Well,
I don't. I assume
might be able to figure it out, but
my assumption was Tyshalle, because Tyshalle is a god in Overworld, and he's known eventually as the Blade of Tyshalle. And I gather from the previous book that Tyshalle is not a nice god. This is not, you're not cheering on the Blade of Tyshalle. And he makes this unholy pact with a god, like, get me off of this cross, and whatever, I will be yours forever.
I got the quote, and it is a quote.
Okay, you know what? Before I do the
suffering
beer,
a sacrament.
Okay, start again.
That's all I'll say.
Start again.
And my Kindle just
make of this suffering a sacrament. And it's gross and it's disturbing and it's really something. And I have a beer called Sacrament, and the only thing that kept me from using that on this episode, for a final draft type thing, was the fact that it's a 750 milliliter bottle at like 7%. And I'm like, look, it's 1 PM. I'm not going to do that to myself. But it was there in spirit. So instead, Drew, I am drinking this from Bohemian Brewery in Salt Lake City, or South Salt Lake City. They make amazing lagers. This one is a Doppelbock called Check You Later.
Check you later.
CZECH. Okay, so check ULATOR. Check you later. It's pretty good. It's pretty good, and the name is excellent. I was hoping to use this for Retreat from the Bodecan because there would be a retreat, but we haven't had a retreat yet. So let's just call this. We'll call this Looking Ahead with the Check You Later. All right.
Okay.
All right. What do you got?
Well, I am drinking a beer from Wiley Roots Brewing Company in Greeley, Colorado. This is a brewery that Lauren used to work at. Imperial
Lauren
chocolate
being
stout.
your wife, for those who don't know.
Yes, yeah, for those who don't know. It's an Imperial chocolate stout with hazelnut added. 10.6%.
So you just decided to go for it. You're like, 1 PM, don't care. Imperial stout. Let's do it.
It's a very small can.
Oh, okay.
Appropriately small.
Yeah.
Not only am I drinking this beer, but I'm drinking it in a Wiley Roots glass branded for this specific beer. This goes out to the poor group of adventurers who got stuck in hell It is called Midnight on the Run.
Oh, no.
And midnight.
Oh,
so,
it's got cat eyes, which is Midnight is the name of the brewery cat there at Wiley Roots.
Yeah, it's a little black cat. She is delightful. But yeah, Midnight on the Run. Oh boy.
That's awesome. Okay, excellent choice. Midnight on the Run. There's already been plenty of disturbing stuff in the, I was going to say the Mile High City, the Vertical City. And there's, I'm sure, lots more to come. So thanks, everybody.
One of the most badass moments in all of fiction is yet to come.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Drew, thanks for coming. And I'll see you in about a week. And maybe we'll make an episode then. Not sure. But I'll see you then.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Craig.